We're going to go ahead and get started. We've got a couple hundred people on the line, which is super exciting. First and foremost, I'm in San Francisco myself. By way of just brief introduction, I'm Elliot, and welcome to the Bessemer Venture Partners B2B Pricing Roundtable. I'm a partner here at the firm. I've spent about the last 15 years as a venture capitalist focused on B2B go-to-market strategies, working with teams across cloud enterprise software, with a little bit of experience in B2B2C. Today happens to be my second wedding anniversary. And my wife reminds me every day, including today, that I'm not cool enough to do consumer. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on B2C or anything kind of social media apps because I'm not good at it. And again, I'm not cool enough to host a panel on that. However, having worked with cloud and B2B founders across different stages from kind of that first customer all the way up to 100 million of ARR and beyond, I can personally attest that pricing strategy and getting it right can be one of the hardest things about being a rapidly growing startup as you make that transition from being, founder and CEO led sales to go-to-market org and sales leader led sales. Whether you're figuring it out for the first time with your pricing model or maybe iterating it as you scale your company, the fact remains that if you don't regularly revisit and optimize pricing, it can certainly stunt your company's growth. You'll end up leaving money on the table, leave underserved customer segments in the dark. Sometimes you leave the door open for incumbents, your competition, but ultimately you're just not going to achieve the revenue that you want or the ARR scale that you're looking for in your projections. It's a big reason why Bessemer was inspired to put together today's panel, a series of events on B2B pricing. And what's really exciting is we're launching something new, Bessemer's pricing course. It is a 7 strategy course delivered to your inbox, which you can subscribe to today. If you're part of this event and when you RSVP'd, I think there was a link or a box to get you set up, but please go to our website and you can certainly RSVP during or after this event. But before we start the roundtable, I just wanted to give you a quick preview as to what you'll be getting from the course that we just launched. After doing extensive interviews and some research with more than 30 of our portfolio companies, along with working with Simon Kucher and partners, we created a course consisting of 7 info-packed and accessible lessons on pricing strategy that will help you and your team get the insights that you need to build and determine your own pricing strategy. We cover things like B2B SaaS pricing archetypes, lessons on customer segmentation, insights on upselling and cross-selling, which we all need to know and love, and best practices overall for optimizing your pricing strategy. So definitely check that out. You can go to bvp.com/pricing-course to sign up today. And I'm pretty sure you won't regret it. Now that I'm getting out of the way, let's talk about why we're here today and hear from the experts. I'm really fortunate to introduce 3 of our executives and residents who work closely with our founders and go-to-market leaders across the Bessemer family of portfolio startups, as they each provide a wealth of strategic, tactical, and operational advice. We're really lucky to have them here today. First, we have Lekha Doshi from LinkedIn, who serves as the VP of Global Operations. We have Ross Beastman from ServiceTitan, who serves as the Chief Revenue Officer. And lastly, we have Akshat Gupta from Airtable, who serves as the Pricing and Monetization Lead. I'll let the 3 of you take it away from here, and then I'm going to jump back on for the Q&A portion of the event today. But in order to kick off the conversation, it would be great for each of you to introduce yourself, provide a little bit of context to level set on everyone, what you do, how your company works, what you're selling. And then if you could, share one quick lesson or anecdote about the most recent pricing project or conundrum that you've taken on. Ross, we'll start with you.
All right, thanks, Elliot, and thanks to the Bessemer team, and thanks to the panelists as well as all the audience members today. Again, Ross Beastman, I serve as the Chief Revenue Officer at ServiceTitan. I've been in seat for about 3.5 years. For those of you that are unfamiliar, ServiceTitan is a software solution for the residential and commercial services segment. So think about the trades. So quite literally for plumbing, heating and air conditioning, electricians. So as you guys come up to the heat of summer and something might happen while you're still working from home to your air conditioner and it goes out, when you call that local HVAC company, it's very likely that ServiceTitan is the software solution that powers their business. So I look after revenue at the business, which for us is all sales and marketing, as well as everything on the post-sale side, from professional services to customer success and support. We're about 2,000 people today. We're a Series F company, and really excited to talk to you today about our journey as it relates to pricing as well as in packaging. And most recently, in the last quarter, we decided to hire our first ever full-time dedicated pricing expert. And I will tell you that I probably wish we had done that sooner, especially as the company embraces new verticals, new segments, new products. It's something that we've tried to chase rather than having a dedicated person be responsible for that. And so we'll talk about some of that as part of the journey today. With that, I'll pass it over to my colleague, Akshat.
Thanks, Ross, and thanks, Elliot, as well as the Bessemer team. Definitely excited to be on the panel and talk about pricing, an area I'm definitely very passionate about. So to introduce myself again, I do pricing and monetization strategy for Airtable. I joined the company about 4 months ago, so still relatively new to the company. But before this, I worked at Stripe in a similar role. And before that, I led product and pricing strategy for Salesforce's platform and industries business. So certainly, like I said, an area I'm passionate about. To share more about what Airtable does, I don't know how many people are familiar with the company itself. It's a low-code platform that can be used to create, a variety of custom productivity and collaboration apps for project management, operations management, product planning, campaign management, that sort of stuff. So it sort of takes, the best of a spreadsheet interface, combines that with like a project management tool, a calendaring tool, a dev planning framework, relational database tables, and adds, automations, pre-built apps to it to make it a very versatile product. From a just a high level business model standpoint, we have a very traditional sort of a SaaS offering. So we have these, 4 plans, which are priced on a per user per month basis, just differentiated by usage and features and so forth. To Elliot's, I guess, other question around, a quick lesson or anecdote. So I would say one of my former coworkers used to say that nothing is as permanent as a temporary fix. I think this probably holds true for many things in life, but definitely for pricing, which I think, a lot of the pricing decisions tend to be sort of, they have high impact, but they can be sort of less reversible as well in the short term. So one has to be really careful about sort of the short-term decisions you're making, because they can be just hard to untangle as customers talk and things go on the forums and so forth. I think relatedly, one should probably, I think I learned this the hard way, that one should be really careful about also making promises about pricing publicly, because again, chances are that over 2-3 year timeframe, you will evolve it. And so it's hard to sort of commit to sort of the promises that were made before. So with that, I will hand it over to you, Lekha.
Thanks, Akshat. My name is Lekha Doshi. I've been at LinkedIn for 9 years, and I run operations for B2B businesses. I think a lot of us know what LinkedIn is. We're a social professional network, but many folks don't realize that we actually sell to businesses. In fact, we have a portfolio of businesses, and we sell beyond just premium subscriptions to our members and ads on our platform. In fact, we have 3 SaaS lines of businesses: the talent solutions business, which sells our data to recruiters to find amazing talent. We have our learning business, which sells courses to companies and L&D professionals to train and skill their talent. We sell to our sales solutions products to sales professionals so that they can grow their businesses. And so those are the 3 SaaS lines of businesses. And we also have our marketing solutions business, which is a traditional ads platform. And so I partner very closely with our sales team and our marketing team, which is where our pricing team is housed today. And together we come up with our go-to-market strategy and execute on that strategy. And I would say that pricing is an extremely important pillar for our go-to-market strategy. I think most recently, there's really 2 areas where we've been focusing and spending a lot of effort as it relates to pricing. The first is around all-in deals, so that we can actually go deeper with our existing customers. So kind of what is the pricing strategy when it's all in with LinkedIn? And then the second area where we've been focusing a lot of energy is around pay for performance. So that's to better align our price to value. So with that, I'll pass it back to you, Ross, to kind of open it up for our discussion.
Excellent. Thanks, Lekha. Thanks, Akshat. So looking forward to this conversation. I think that it will be robust. We've got some great questions that were asked in advance of the session, but I want to guide us today through three big primary topics around pricing strategy, because there is so much to cover, but to try to keep us grounded and on schedule. So the first one that we're going to talk about is this chicken or egg conundrum, right? What comes first? Is it product market fit, or is it pricing strategy? The second is, what are the big mistakes that the three of us collectively have made in building out pricing strategies? And then third is, what is the best practice as it relates to building out that dedicated or potentially designated pricing team? And then we're going to open it up and pass it back to Elliot to help us with some Q&A directly from the audience. So I'll go ahead and get things started. So this is going down to the path of product market fit or pricing model, what makes sense to go first. And I'll share it with you from my perspective. So when I joined ServiceTitan a few years ago, we were doing well. We were about 40 million in ARR. And we wanted to identify ways in which we could continue to penetrate the markets in which we served. I will also say, as being a salesperson at heart, it was a bit of Wild West. And we ended up engaging Simon Kutcher in an engagement, which was the second time I've had the opportunity to work with Eddie and his team over there to identify ways in which we could maximize our opportunity, but also make it so that our customers actually resonated with our pricing and licensing model. And so the recommendation there as it relates to product market fit, and we certainly had some because our founders were the sons of contractors that had an expertise in software, and they built a solution for a highly underserved market in terms of technology advancement, was identifying all the levers in our software that could provide positive business outcomes and business value to our customers. So that's really where we started as it related to thinking about changing our pricing model. So through exhaustive interviews with our customers across functional teams that included product, finance, sales, marketing, et cetera, we came back with recommendations of changing our licensing model that made it easier for our prospects as well as our customers to understand and comprehend, but also made it very specifically and intentionally about us sharing in their success, because we knew that there were specific areas of the product that could actually positively drive ROI for our customers. And that's where we anchored. And we chose to not be super capitalistic in terms of working with every function in the business that we could potentially monetize, but gearing our licensing metric to where it was actually demonstrable in ROI, and then making the intentional decision to give the software away for free to other functions in the business as well. So, that's my experience there. And I'd like to pass it off to Akshat to talk about his experience at Airtable to determine if you had something different or if you have any life lessons there as it relates to product market fit and pricing, what comes first.
Yeah, no, makes sense. Thank you, Ross. I will preface this by saying that I've been with the company for 4 months only, so I don't have the whole history of how we, approached it. But I will share, my thoughts based on what I've learned over time. So I do think product market fit sort of comes first, but pricing is a fast follow. It's not an afterthought. A lot of times what happens is you think about product market fit and you just get to pricing eventually later on, and that is not the right answer either, right? I think pricing does inform a lot of the sort of the product roadmap and things you develop, how you develop features, you feature gate them, you package them as you go to market. So it is important for companies to have that sort of a monetization mindset early on, but they should first obviously prioritize product market fit. I think one thing I see at companies also is that they start, appealing to startups first and smaller companies. And then as they sort of become more serious about a particular product area or business area, they realize that to monetize it better, they need to sort of appeal to enterprises, right? And they then also discover that they don't have some of the key features that the product needs to have to even get the conversation started with enterprises, right? And these are not on the roadmap even for many years. So that is why I think it is important to sort of have that monetization mindset as well, which informs your product roadmap and other decisions as well. I think with Airtable, Airtable definitely took some time to really perfect its product market fit before it, got into a pricing model. But I think there was some version of a pricing model early on as well. And I think it wasn't perfect, but it never is, right? It is an iterative process. You start with something and as you learn more and the product matures, you sort of evolve it. In certain ways, I think it was relatively easier for us because there were other sort of established players that were addressing parts of the value proposition with point solutions around project management and so forth. So we weren't quite starting from scratch. And I feel like nobody quite does start from scratch also, because there is some level of alternatives in the market. But in other ways, we also like do a lot more. Like as we like to say internally, the ceiling is much higher with Airtable. You can just do a lot more. And so there is always that question on how do you capture that additional value that you sort of deliver with Airtable. So that's how I think about it. Would be curious to hear like how you think about this as well. And more specifically, I think, you joined LinkedIn in 2012, I think after a year after the company went public. So you've obviously seen a series of pricing changes and pricing model changes probably over the years. And so as you think about that as well, like what do you think has sort of stayed the same or changed, and like what stays the same generally as the company matures and sort of evolves over time as well?
Yeah, sure. So I agree with both of you. I think product market fit comes first. It's another way to say like determine where are you extracting value for your customers through your product, and based on that you can figure out the pricing. And I think a tangible example of that at LinkedIn has been, not many years ago, over a decade ago, LinkedIn invented this concept of passive recruiting. Right? Historically, folks would, if they were looking for amazing talent, they would post a job. And then based on that, they can, get some active talent who's looking for jobs to come join their company. LinkedIn developed this market of passive recruiting, try to attract talent that's not necessarily looking, because they may actually be the best talent. And so how do you price against that? Like do you price against like $100 job board, or are you actually solving a different problem for recruiters? And so based on the software and talking to customers, it became very clear that this talent that they were going after was actually, one, more valuable, and two, methods to get to that talent were through either agencies or through connections of connections that were not necessarily easy to access. And so that took a lot of human hours to get to. And so as a result, like the value that we were providing was so much more than one would expect if you just priced it at a normal job board. So that's just like an example. And so instead of hundreds of dollars, we charge our software per seat in the beginning, thousands of dollars. And it was easy for our sales team to also explain that pricing model when we could actually have a really great story around product market fit. So product market fit to me is like, has to come first, because that means that you understand the value that you're creating. And yes, and actually you're right, like our pricing models have evolved quite a bit over the last decade. It started with a per seat model, as much of traditional SaaS does, right? It's like, hey, if you want 10 seats, 10x the price, right, per seat. And it slowly evolved to a segment-based pricing, to a multi-year contract pricing with step-ups in pricing over the years, and then all-in deals, which I mentioned earlier. And then now we're moving to a kind of a pay for performance to bring us closer to price and value. And so I think that evolution is a constant. And so, the only constant in the world is change, as I like to say. And so I think that's one kind of thing that you need to keep in mind when it comes to pricing. I think other things to keep in mind are, testing is extremely important, and making sure that you're constantly having conversations with customers and the sales team to understand where is value being extracted, and again, how has that evolved? What is the competitive landscape like? And so just having that muscle in place within the pricing team is very important. And then also flexibility with your pricing is a constant as well. I think we learned early on at LinkedIn that while we wanted to have price integrity and have one price, no matter if you were based in the US or in Australia or in India, that doesn't necessarily actually work for the market. And so, for example, in emerging markets like India and Brazil, same example of our recruiter seats, we were charging thousands of dollars. In many of these markets, they cannot afford that, or it didn't make sense based on, price to value. And so, we worked with the product team, worked with the pricing team, marketing and sales to figure out a way to create a new packaging for those markets. We de-featured the product and then we changed the pricing accordingly to better align to those markets. And so keeping that flexibility is extremely important and valuable. So yeah, those are just some of the things that I think are like a constant that you need to keep in mind as you're thinking about your pricing strategy and how it evolves. I don't know, Ross, Akshat, like, does that resonate with you?
It totally does. And you hit on something there that I'm really interested to get your perspective on, because it's one that I certainly haven't cracked. And it's all around this topic of pricing integrity. And I think about it as pricing integrity, but also pricing consistency. So, when you're working with a universe of existing customers as well as prospects that are, let's say, they're in a very similar vertical, but varying in different sizes, and they share, who they use for software solutions and the price that they paid, and they go viral with that, which happens in many cases with B2B companies. How do you guys address that pricing integrity as well as consistency so that it's not somebody saying, well, I paid X amount in 2017 and my friend wants to buy in 2020 and wants the same exact deal, and defending that?
Yeah, we at least don't have that issue when it's like a look back in years, because I think at least in enterprise SaaS, it's like an expectation that over time, as long as the product is keeping up with the market, there will be slight increases. I think there's more of a question of like, hey, my peer sets are paying a different price than I am. Why is that the case? And we definitely want to avoid those situations. And so for that reason, actually at LinkedIn, we have a really strong ethos on like not actually providing discounts that are beyond what we are or programmatic. And that's because we want to keep to a consistent message on why we've priced the way we have. That does not mean that we don't have different pricing tiers. So for our larger relationships, we will provide a larger discount, but we make that very clear up front that it's based on either some type of like, bulk tiered pricing, or it's based on some type of commitment in all-in deals, or it's based off of the fact that actually they're buying a product that's defeatured. So as long as you have like a message that's consistent, I think it's okay. But again, like that's how we've executed it with the go-to-market teams. I don't know, Akshat, if that's consistent with what's like pricing best practice, when you come up with discounting.
Yeah, no, I think that absolutely makes sense. Around discounting, I think depends on sort of almost like what precedents you set, right? Like I think I've seen companies also where you do just, they're used to discounting, and that's what like sort of the sales team is used to doing, and then customers sort of expect that, and like the customers talk, and so that becomes the industry norm. So when you are almost pricing products, you think about list price being somewhat, you take that into account sort of when you set the list price, right? So in a way, like I'm not a huge fan of that. Also, when like if your customers know that they have to sort of call in and they can always get a discount, then what's the point of sort of having these list prices and so forth? Especially as we move to a more sort of a product-led motion of self-serve and whatnot, and that customers don't necessarily need to pick up the phone to call sales and get started. So in a way, like I like that philosophy and sort of having that integrity around discounting and list prices.
Yeah. And Ross, how do you feel as a sales leader on discretionary discounting?
Yeah. So I have to really try to figure out a way to relax that muscle of, win a deal at all costs. And you got to play the long game. Certainly, years ago when I was at Adobe, when I was an account executive, just tried to find any way to possibly get this deal done on the timeline to fulfill my obligation against my quota. But, one of my managers at the time said, hey, we're not going to do a bad deal now that's going to mortgage the future. And the more I think about that being in my seat now is around the right types of deal structures that are not only for hitting the month, hitting the quarter, hitting the year, but how do we create something that is going to pay dividends over the long term and be mirrored in the behaviors of the rest of our sales team to maintain our integrity? It's this old concept of rising tide lifts all boats. And I think that we've really anchored in on specific discount thresholds, literally based on a rate card that escalates based on level of approval workflow. And what we've seen in terms of results, just based on that operational rigor and discipline, is not only that our average revenue per user is higher, but our actual close rates are better because there's not this back and forth between deal desk around the constant iterations to try to go race to the bottom just to get a deal done. And so we have this saying that our customers and our deals are less brittle than we think they are. And so instituting that level of discipline, to my surprise, having been a former sales rep, really has paid dividends for our organization.
Yeah, we've seen that. We've seen the same thing here at LinkedIn as well. So I couldn't agree more. It's hard. It's a hard pill to swallow, but once you do it, you can become a believer really quickly, for sure.
Yeah.
I think, maybe it's worth kind of sharing some of our experiences around the table around, mistakes that we've made or on the job training that we've had as it relates to pricing, and any specific case studies that are worth mentioning. And so maybe Ross, you can start us off with anything that comes to mind for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So as I mentioned previously, we worked with Simon Kucher, and we got cross-functional team together in my early days at ServiceTitan to identify ways in which we were going to address changing our go-to-market strategy and really using pricing and packaging specifically as a differentiator, as an opportunity to accelerate new logo acquisition. And so I think what's important as I look back on it is to start with a hypothesis. Like, what is, if we change the following, how is this going to be reflected in both performance as well as the market's receptiveness? The second is establishing very specific success criteria, right? And it can't just be, we want to charge more for our software. It's got to be, multifaceted, from we want to increase close rates, we want to go and pursue different segments of the market that are effectively priced out based on the way in which we present pricing today. We want to look at introducing graduation of more utilization of our software and potentially going up funnel into higher tiered packages, and then looking at the whole customer lifetime value to see ways in which we can address attaching really valuable products to our already successful customers and separating new logos versus upsell. So that was the first two primary lessons. And the third, and I think is probably the most important, is to be super intentional about spending time with your existing customers, your existing evangelists, and literally going and walking the halls to understand the utilization of the software and the specific areas of ROI that are demonstrated. And then again, aligning your pricing model and your licensing model to their success. We quite literally had our consultants as well as our team members walking the halls of these industrial warehouses and HVAC shops. And it was a departure from my previous experience, having sold and brought products to market only for the Fortune 500, to going into a completely different market. And we recognized that we weren't able to successfully serve the entirety of the market that we wanted to, based on the way in which we were both complex, as well as limiting ourselves by only having one package to present. And the most interesting insight that I personally gained from this is learning how our customers and our prospective customers thought about pricing their own products and services to their customers, because that made for a very natural transition for us to align our pricing methodology to something that was super familiar to them. The second, big area that was interesting for us is the way in which we tested and iterated the hypothesis and the success criteria. And this one is disruptive, in my opinion, for organizations that don't do this the right way. And so we took a handful of our best sellers, which is scary, right? Taking your best sellers off the phones, out of the field, and dedicated them to this for 2 quarters, knowing that we were going to see likely a depression in terms of our closing, our MRR and ARR bookings, but we knew that ultimately, if we got this right, it was going to pay dividends in the future. And so we called this the Tiger Team, and they were on the front lines taking input from the steering committee and the experts, and then they would come back and report to the steering committee about their success in the field and the different testing and iterations that they've had across the different pricing levers, the anchors, the discounts, the packages. And we perfected that over the course of 2 quarters, where we had 2 or 3 successful months of exiting our success criteria. And what was awesome about that is we not only demonstrated it in real application with our best sellers, is that those sellers on the Tiger Team ended up becoming the enablers to the rest of the field when we decided to go full force adoption. So a huge lesson learned there, and it's one that we've replicated now over the course of the past couple of years.
That's great. That's great. Ross, one quick question on for you on that, right? As you went through the process of sort of revamping the pricing and packaging for the company, with the consultants, were there challenges with sort of pricing decisions that had been made for existing customers? And how did you guys think about sort of migrating them to this new model, or sort of letting them keep their sort of legacy pricing? Any thoughts and insights there?
Yeah, awesome question. And for a lot of the folks that are probably on this phone, founders are probably still very involved in the business, and you're talking to customers that were the ones that took big bets and partnering with them. So there's special relationships there. And so, we didn't even have contracts when I joined the organization. And What was nice about that is like literally, speed to deal, so to speak, was super fast and super efficient. But there are a bunch of second order consequences associated with that, where on debookings, potential churn, things like that, where there's non-customer commitments. So we had to be super sensitive. We brought our customers that were legacy or special relationships into the process, and we put them on a contract that ultimately, positioned this as an opportunity for them to grow with us. And we put all the appropriate language in there as it relates to service level agreements and introduction of additional value added services. But it was definitely an area that we had to spend some tender loving care around.
Makes sense.
So Akshay, with you, specifically, you've got a career in this. You've been doing this for a number of years now. Tell us about the highs, the lows, and some of the most impactful challenges around pricing, how you faced it, and certain areas that you want to speak to directly about your experience.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'd somehow not thought about my career in pricing until now, but yeah, I've spent a few years. I think one of the things, one key question when you do a pricing exercise is, thinking about how do you balance the trade-off between sort of adoption and monetization, right? That's a key question that comes up, irrespective of sort of the size of the company or sort of the maturity of the company. And the answer can be sort of very different, even for different products within the same company. So I think some learnings, examples, or challenges I face, I can talk about with respect to that. And I think this problem also gets compounded when you have sort of a platform play with attach of different products, right? So for example, when people think of Stripe, people really think of payments processing and sort of the 2.9% plus 30 cents. So I used to be asked this question as well, what are you doing with pricing at Stripe? Because isn't it done, basically? But they also have a whole suite of sort of software products that are adjacent to payments, right? And so for one of the products, when I joined, what I learned was that there was a decision that had been made to make the freemium model extremely generous, right? The thesis there was that this product is in early stages, it is feature light compared to competitors, they appeal to startups, so startups are price sensitive. And so that may be the reason why they come to Stripe, as well as still with every transaction, Stripe was making payments processing margin. So was it worth sort of doing any direct monetization for this product? But over time, as the company got more serious about sort of software and services as sort of a strategic area and an area of interest, they wanted to monetize that more. And as I dug into this, and I think you were saying this before, talking to customers and having a good understanding of what, how they think about value, that is extremely important. And I think updating that understanding of value over time is also very important, right? You talk to customers over 2-3 years as the product matures and sort of learn how they think about that. So as I dug into this a bit more, I learned that most customers were not even aware of the freemium model, actually, and that was not the reason why they were coming to this product, right? They thought it was just easy to integrate, and there were many sort of advantages they saw versus per se the freemium model. Also, I noticed that it was so generous that many of these customers would not even hit it for a year. So basically, we were just giving away the product for free, which as a pricing person, I thought, I wanted to change and manage. So this led to a lot of tough conversations with sort of the team as well and cross-functional leadership, because early on as a company you want to really focus on adoption, and here you didn't want to lose any adoption also because you were still making payments margin on every transaction. So I think for me this sort of thinking about this trade-off very carefully, but having this very good understanding of how customers think about value and changing that over time was extremely key. And I think we eventually actually decided to just completely remove the freemium model, and we didn't see any change in adoption, which was just a very interesting learning that you just don't think comes intuitively generally. So yeah, I think those would be my thoughts on that. Yeah, does that sort of make sense? Or
yeah, no, it totally makes sense. Yeah, and I think what would be interesting, I know that there's been some questions coming through around pricing teams, and actually I don't know if you can have do you have any advice on when a pricing team is like put together at your organization, or even to many different ones, like what's really important when you're building a pricing team, and what should you look for in talent?
Absolutely. Like I can share my thoughts, and would love to hear from both of you as well. Like it's definitely great to get learnings from other companies as well. So I think of this as two parts. So the first is how are pricing decisions being made, and the second is like, where does the centralized sort of owner of pricing recommendations who's driving the process to get input from different functions and like think through the different trade-offs and implications sort of sit in the org, right? So I think of this as these two questions. The first one, I very strongly believe that pricing decisions should be made by a cross-functional body that has representation from product, sales, finance, marketing, and so forth, right? And this applies to companies both big and small, right? I don't think you have to be a very large company to sort of institute this. So I think this works at every stage. But when I think about sort of building a pricing function or having this dedicated pricing hire itself, I think there are three natural places. It's product, finance, or marketing, and I've seen different flavors of it. I personally think that product sort of makes more sense as the place, because I feel like a lot of pricing decisions tend to have product-related implications. If you think about packaging and whatnot, and I also think like pricing decisions should be approached with a very like product mindset, especially in tech. But the answer can be very different for different industries as well. There are industries like fintech where cost is a huge factor into sort of pricing, so where maybe finance makes more sense, and that determines sort of the capabilities you get for this person and so forth. Yeah, that's how I have sort of thought about this in the past. But like, I'm curious to hear, and Ross, you as well, like of how your companies do it and what you think are the best practices here.
Yeah, at LinkedIn, actually, pricing sits in our marketing organization because it sits right between sales and product, right? Kind of bringing together kind of the constraints that you mentioned, Akshat, around like the packaging and the feature sets and such that you want to build within the product. And then at the same time, be close to the customer and the field to understand like what's actually sticking and working. And so marketing has been kind of the home of our pricing team, and it's worked out really nicely and well from that vantage point, I would say. And it's been like, I think there's like a few things that I've observed work really well with great pricing teams, at least at LinkedIn. And that's been like, the alignment between product, but also more importantly, I think is like sales, because there's this constant feedback loop on what is actually working and what is the reaction from our customers, what is the competitive landscape like, and therefore when and if we should be pivoting. So I think that's like really important. And the second is, similar to what you said, actually, like pricing is a cross-functional body of work in many ways. It is actually really hard to do it really well, especially at the scale that LinkedIn at least is at. And so it's very important to have the muscle to measure incrementality of the impact of pricing, because it's so difficult. Like you kind of have to rally so many teams to prioritize the pricing effort. And so the best way to do that is to have conviction on like how much impact it's going to have on the top line and the bottom line, because most pricing initiatives actually go straight to the bottom line, which makes it like incredible as a growth lever. And so I found that the best pricing teams at LinkedIn are the ones that are able to get alignment on what that incrementality is. And then like, deep expertise, like such as like yourself, Akshat, like on like coming from industry of like what are the different pricing playbooks out there, but at the same time being flexible with the competitive landscape and having a really close pulse of what's going on. But I'm interested, Ross, like I know you said, or I believe you said earlier that you just recently built out a pricing team or made your first hire. So love to hear like what were you looking for in that talent, and where in the org does this pricing sit at ServiceTitan?
Yeah, so historically, pricing had been kind of a shared function of responsibility across marketing, sales, finance. We actually put a heavy emphasis, because we are a vertical software company, on industry. So bringing in that industry subject matter expertise, and of course, product. And what we've recognized, and we've made a decision to move forward with a full-time hire, who we're really excited about, who's been with us for a couple months now. He reports directly to our CFO. Or in our finance organization. And so finance effectively owns this, and there's shared responsibility across the different functions, sales and post-sales included. And I think that what I recognize is that pricing is an evergreen initiative, and that's why we're pursuing it this way, especially as your business model and your go-to-market structure becomes more complex, as you create new products for upsell, as you create new segments to go and pursue, whether they're in different verticals or potentially going into different geographies. All of these things need to be focused on effectively from a full-time basis with contributions from the different team members. Whereas historically we did well, but it was a shared service, and we found that the body of work became so much that only dedicating 10 or 20% of our week to pricing and packaging wasn't enough to keep up with where we were moving directionally as a company.
Awesome. So I'm going to force my way in here a little bit, although it's been a super organic and engaging discussion. I've taken some notes myself. Ironically, we did a kind of go-to-market strategy session yesterday, where a number of these topics were touched upon, but we're going to shift into the Q&A section. You guys have addressed a couple of these, but I'm going to try to frame them in a bit more of a pointed way. So we can make sure for the audience and our attendees that we address them directly. If I take a step back, a lot's been talked about things like product-led growth, bottoms up versus top down, putting your product in the middle of that entire flywheel for sales. So let's start at the bottom. There's a lot of people on the Zoom call right now that have asked about freemium tier, or how do we work with pricing strategies where we want to get the product out to as many users as possible, let them experience it, find some value, but eventually we all need to turn on some type of pricing. So let's start with you, Akshat, and get some of your perspective and experience on kind of shifting customers from that freemium tier to paid.
Yeah, absolutely. So Airtable does have a premium plan or a free plan. And when customers start on Airtable, we also do like a trial on one of our plans for 14 days, and we extend it if users don't find that sufficient, right? So we have taken a very freemium sort of an approach, as well as we do have a self-serve sort of a motion, which this supports. So I think the answer depends on many factors, right? Like the industry you're in, the product you have, the go-to-market motion you have as well, right? So in certain cases, I've seen that the cost itself of delivering a freemium product or offering a freemium plan is actually pretty high, right? So there are those situations where it may not make sense, and you do trials to just give users a taste of the product, but also force some sort of urgency, right? Like that is another advantage of trial, that they at the end of the 14-day period, they are kind of forced to just like make a decision, which helps. Dropbox used to have this huge problem around freemium, right? That they had a whole lot of customers on the free plan and they were just unable to migrate them. So I think you have to design your free plan in a way, if it first of all makes sense from your industry product go-to-market motion, that gives users a good sense of the value and taste, but sort of isn't like a production use case where they can just sort of live on it and that's enough, right? So over time, you need to maybe modify that if you see that happening. So those are sort of my learnings on premium.
Fantastic. And Leica is a proud, I don't know how many years I see my $59.99 LinkedIn premium bill go through every month. It would be awesome to get your perspective as well, but also thinking through how you guys have priced that conversion over time. I think it used to be $39.99. I actually don't know what I pay now, but I'm a happy paid subscriber of LinkedIn Premium, but would be great to get your perspective there, particularly on the pricing.
Yeah, sure. So first of all, thank you for being a loyal and committed customer to LinkedIn. We really appreciate it. And LinkedIn is really unique, right? We have the consumer business and we have like the enterprise business. And Elliot, similar to what your wife said about you, my husband says the same thing about me. We had our wedding anniversary yesterday, and I'm also not a consumer expert. But that being said, our sales folks say all the time, like the number one competitor to selling our enterprise software is actually free LinkedIn. And also even our consumer subscriptions. If you do have a freemium model, what I can say is that I would put an investment in data science, because a freemium model is helpful in mining through a base of potentially great consumers or customers who have found value on your product, and you can cherry pick from that to transfer over to an enterprise contract. But you need to understand the data, the usage patterns, the feature sets. And this is where like the packaging and the defeaturing is really important. And this is where pricing probably does belong in product, if that's the kind of the model that you're going with. But we have actually going, many companies start with freemium and then, slowly work themselves up. Actually, we are exploring a freemium model with our B2B businesses and seeing if there is an opportunity to cast a wider net to then use a data science layer to actually create leads for our sales teams that really find the sweet spot of customers that are most likely to succeed and most likely to buy our products. So that's where I find freemium to be really helpful.
That's awesome. And Ross, any thoughts on this?
So we don't have the concept of a freemium version of our software. It's quite a heavy lift. We bring our core product to market. What we have done successfully is the introduction of different packages, right, with different feature sets. And so we were, ineffective previously in being able to capture the entirety of the market or that wide net that Leica talked about. But when we introduced an entry or starter package that had some of the core features at a lower price point, that allowed us to go and pursue a part of the total addressable market that had previously been priced out. And then where we see some freemium version of our software being brought actually for free is in the post-sales journey when we introduce our subscription add-on products, where we will in many cases provide those for free for a period of time with an expectation that it converts based on a specific contractual obligation, but it gives the customer the out and really puts the onus on our customer success teams to make sure that they're getting the full value out of the add-on product.
That's awesome. I feel like you can read my notes here because that was a little bit of my next question. So I think you've saved us some time, or at least me some time. As we move through the stack, or I guess that kind of hamburger into the product section, I would be curious, not every company is a PLG or product-led growth kind of go-to-market engine. Some are kind of more the legacy, we're going to sell to different customer segments, different tiers, or kind of size of revenue customer. One of the questions that we saw a couple of times was, any advice for how to sell to companies of different sizes? The platform might be the same. It might kind of deliver the same amount of value, but the willingness to pay, kind of going back to my old business school days, for a $30 billion revenue company with a huge budget for what you're selling them versus the 30 million or $10 million revenue customer can be very different just from an opening engagement on pricing. Could you guys give some kind of experience and perspective there? And how about we start with Akshat again?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think the way to address that, and which is sort of done in a standard way in the industry, is really thinking through like customer segmentation and sort of a good, better, best packaging structure, right? So chances are, and actually it applies in most cases, that as these customers, if you think about like a 30 million versus 30 billion customer, chances are their needs will also be very different, right? So larger companies will generally look for more customization, more integrations. They'll look for all these things and sort of custom branding and whatnot. And these are things that they will heavily value and be willing to pay for, versus smaller companies won't be able to and wouldn't care about them, right? So I think it's important. And I think many companies early on just have one package that one size fits all. And, with pricing and packaging, one size definitely does not fit all, right? So thinking about like a good, better, best package and changing that over time so that you have, these packages tiered towards different customer personas, and you can also sort of capture the value you deliver through that with different price points is how I think about it.
Awesome, thank you. Leica, any thoughts on this?
Yeah, so I agree. Segmentation is extremely important. It's hard to also get right. I think another tool in the toolkit is this concept of usage-based pricing or pay for performance, where it's a little easier for smaller companies to make a commitment when you, as the vendor of choice, is aligned to their goals. And so at LinkedIn, we're exploring the concept of pay for performance with our job slot. So, hey, you only pay us if you actually make a hire, as an example, right? That's like hard to execute, but that's much easier for a small company to commit to. So there are different tactics, but I think the most standard one is probably segmentation.
And as a brief follow-up to that, those are certainly concepts and terminology that are used in the market, kind of consumption-based versus pay for performance. Have you guys found any nuances when you're talking to customers in terms of how they're receiving those two concepts? Meaning, sometimes pay for performance or I'm sorry, pay for consumption or usage-based pricing is just how many API calls or, how many air tables someone has set up versus pay for value or pay for cost savings. Curious if you guys have any kind of equations that can ascribe value to a customer, whether it's cost savings or efficiency or driving revenue, and then has that ever affected the way you think about pricing?
I'll start. So we don't really have the concept of pay for performance, but one of the objections that we sometimes get about our licensing model is they say, hey, every time that I add a new person into the business, I'm going to have to add a new license. But this goes back to really understanding the value drivers behind the software. And for us, we have incredible efficiency that happens, and we give that product away for free for people in the office to be more efficient, great customer experience. And then one of the biggest levers is growing your revenue. And so when you add people that are in a revenue bearing role and you ask for licensing value to that, that is a direct reflection of the company being successful utilizing the software and being able to add more people in revenue bearing work, which is tightly aligned to our pricing model.
Awesome. Akshay and Aleka, any thoughts on this?
I think, again, that needs to align to, and I think Russ summarized it well, it needs to align to the value. So LinkedIn, as a subsidiary of Microsoft, usage-based pricing is most commonly used with like Azure, as an example. Like the more that you use Azure, the more you pay, and like it makes sense. Like you're providing storage and computing power, and that makes sense. Where pay for performance makes sense is like where you can actually measure outcomes, and it actually, the outcomes themselves are providing the value, and that's actually harder to do on Azure, right? And so that's I think you can game the system by increasing usage but not increasing value with the product, and that's where you have to be careful with usage-based pricing. And that's not necessarily going to be the case with Azure, but it could be with like doing search queries. Like it's really hard to search for amazing talent on LinkedIn, and every time you charge me for a search, and so I don't feel like you guys are aligned to where I'm getting value. And so this is where it needs to be, again, price to value is important to determine.
Awesome. Akshay, any perspectives there?
Yeah, no, I agree with all the things that were said. I do think that like to the extent possible, pay for performance makes more sense. So paying for sort of outcome result makes more sense, and aligning sort of pricing to that value versus sort of like the inputs, right? So because in a way, otherwise usage-based pricing models sort of disincentivize usage, because customers are always worried about their bills going up as they sort of bring in more data, let's say, right? If your pricing model is subject to sort of ingest and like data storage and things like that, versus really like caring about the outcome metrics themselves. I think we're zooming back out, like comparing sort of usage-based pricing to subscription. Obviously, there is also this sort of conversation in the market of like, hey, more and more companies sort of think about usage-based pricing, and does that make sense? So I think there, like, I would say, while usage-based pricing sort of in a way is scalable, flexible, and works very well for small companies, as like you said as well. There are challenges, right, around predictability for the customer, the vendor, aligning to business metrics and ARR and your sales comp and all these systems and revenue recognition and whatnot. So I also think that usage-based pricing sort of isn't sort of the answer for every company yet. And what I have seen is that it works for sort of a subset of customers, either very on the small end side where startups are willing to just do something on a usage-based model so that they don't have to commit to annual contracts, or for very large customers, right, who worry about shelfware problem that happens with subscription pricing often. So I think what there I've also seen is that it varies a lot by industry and product. Like in IaaS and Azure and AWS, obviously that is the standard to sort of go with. In other cases, like subscription-based pricing may still sort of very well be the thing that appeals to a majority of the customers.
Awesome. Okay, we've got just a few minutes left. I'm going to squeeze in two questions really quickly. Two that I think about a lot with my own portfolio and when I'm having this discussion with go-to-market and pricing leaders. As we talked about a lot today, you have to be willing to iterate. and move quickly as the market moves. We've talked about this throughout the hour, a little bit of, competitive changes in the market that might influence your price. Just want to revisit that. How would you weight a direct competitor changing their price versus, and well, all direct competitors, but say your number one competitor in the market changing the price versus say the number 3 or number 4 that's creeping up in market discussions, but they've kind of dropped out the floor on pricing a little bit. How would you weight those two situations differently? Let's start with, I see everyone thinking, so let's start with Ross.
All right. So as it relates to competitive, it's something I'm super passionate about. I don't ever prescribe to, a race to the bottom as it relates to discounting. There are certain ways to address the objections that your prospects may be bringing up, or even your existing customers around competitive pricing. And so to the extent that your business has insights into historical success rates, verbatims coming directly from customers that have migrated from those competitive solutions, or even the churn rate, to the extent that you have that in comparison, I think that these are all really easy ways to overcome the objections around pricing comparisons. And then when you really feel the pressure on the discounting, I think that there are far more creative ways, from structuring both packaging as well as pricing schedules in the latitude, or what I would call creative latitude, that you can allow for sellers and deal desks to take advantage of. So for example, okay, I'll match that competitor's price for 6 months and it's going to ramp up. I'm going to show you the value while you're live for 6 months, and then you're going to see that, and I'm going to ramp it up over time. Or even doing that type of sequencing and ramping over the course of a 3-year agreement. I think there's far more that you can do instead of just racing to the bottom on discount.
Fantastic. Leica, any thoughts on this?
I agree. I think that there's creative ways to address pricing. We definitely keep a very close pulse to the competitive landscape, but we also keep a very close pulse to NPS of our customers. And so actually that's usually our leading indicator of whether or not we need to be doing something with pricing, because it's really hard. We don't believe we're in a commoditized market. And so it's really hard to make direct comparisons just because someone's made a move competitively, but we do take both those data points, both NPS and competitive pricing, to determine whether or not we need to make some pricing changes.
Awesome. And Akshat?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And I would say that over time that, so the key thing to think about is like how customers see value being delivered through the product. And over time, as the company matures, like chances are that it may have a more defined sort of a market positioning, right? So if you think about Salesforce itself, it is priced at a premium compared to all its competitors, and it's still doing well. And they haven't really paid much attention to competitive pricing as such, because they still our customers still buy the product, right? So I think in a way, I wouldn't recommend being hyper reactive to sort of competitive pricing changes. And as Ross said, there are other creative ways to sort of address that in the short term if you feel the pressure in compete situations.
All right, fantastic. Well, with 0 minutes left, I have one last rapid fire question. There's no wrong answer here, but it's probably the favorite question that I got. Leica, you mentioned something about a data science team when you're thinking about pricing strategies and coming up with different plans and practices and willingness to pay. But one of the questions we saw a couple of times is, how much do you guys think, and we'll go percentage basis out of 100 percentage points, how much of pricing is art versus science? Meaning, how much of it is you and your data science team and the smart folks that you work with every time figuring it out? And how much of it is the art of feeling out the market, kind of the customer you're talking to, and that kind of person-to-person negotiation? And we'll start with Leica.
I think it probably, I don't know what the percentage breakdown would be here at LinkedIn, but I would say my guess is that early on it's more of an art than a science, and then over time, as you actually have more data points and trend lines and customer feedback, it becomes much more of a science. So I would say LinkedIn is a much more mature company compared to ServiceTitan, and Airtable probably spends much more time from a science angle.
And Ross?
You want the sales guy to say it's 99% art, right?
Yeah.
No, I think that it's a healthy balance. Look, we lead with data first. We take all the insights. We have a robust data science team that is fantastic. They were intimately involved in our pricing and packaging study. And then we combine that with the historical experience that many of our sales leaders had on structuring deals. So I think it's a very healthy balance.
And lastly, Akshat.
Yeah, so I agree with Lekha's answer. I think it changes like how much it is of an art and science early on versus later. So right now at Airtable, that definitely, feels more of an art. And eventually, I think like as we have more customers and more data to be able to mine and make decisions, I think it will be more of a science. But yeah.
All right, fantastic. Well, look, I know we've gone over by a couple of minutes here. We've still got a couple of hundred people on the Zoom call, and it's really because of the high quality of our experts that we had today. So thank you guys very much for being so generous with your time. As you can see on the slide here, this is just the beginning of our new pricing course. So please check out bvp.com/pricing-course. And we'll be sure to kind of summarize all of the learnings here today and put it out in a secondary piece. And we've recorded it. So we'll be able to send that out for folks that might want to share it with the team. So lastly, Akshat, Lekha, Ross, thank you very much. And we'll certainly circle back with you guys soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.